So once again, welcome to our FanTALES closing event. I'm delighted to see so many people from around the world participating in this event, both in Kortrijk, in Belgium, and remotely. The world can be a dark place. The year 2020, as many of you know, has shown that this, in many respects, is a dark place. And I'm not referring to the virus that's actually wreaking havoc in our hospitals, in our schools, and in our families. But I'm talking about other invisible enemies like inequality, injustice, and intolerance. But there is always hope, and hope lives in a sheltered place, far away from the darkness, maybe in some kind of shire. In this place, potentially a shire, people are telling stories. Stories about how worlds can be different. Stories that can make us forget reality for a short while, but also stories about how we might make the world a better place. When we tell stories, we show our resilience and capacity for appreciating the good, for connecting to others, and seeing the world from their perspective. Sometimes they give us strength for transforming reality. In the year 2020, much storytelling is taking place online. In the literature on language learning and media studies, this phenomenon is often referred to as storytelling in the digital wilds. You're looking at a screenshot from Archive of Our Own. That's an online platform where almost 3 million people today share their work that shows the potential of transformative storytelling. For example, stories that show what would happen if Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit in the stories of Tolkien, was a female character, of which you've just seen a depiction. These stories are written by fans who are deeply passionate about the original story material and are therefore called fanfiction. Fanfiction can be just for fun, but sometimes fans also transform the original story to express their disagreements with the author, to write back, and to give form to their identities. On sites like Archive of Our Own, fans connect to each other and give each other constructive feedback that improves their work and skills. And we'll see a little bit of this in the keynote later on today. Another thing to note is that on sites like Archive of Our Own, languages and cultures often mingle and enrich each other. So what you're seeing here, you're seeing two highlighted stories. One is written in English, the other one is Spanish, but they're both about a source text that is originally in English. So to summarize, storytelling in the digital wilds is transformative. They take an existing story and transform it in some way. It is participatory, where people engage with one another, discuss stories, rewrite stories. It is multilingual, and it is multicultural. And it is being done by people who are fans, people who are language lovers, and people, some potentially all-round geeks who engage in gaming, in narrative-driven games, for example. Shannon.
All right, thank you. So this brings us to talking about what FanTALES brings to the table. So Frederick laid a bit of foundation for what we're drawing upon in the digital wilds. We're bringing this into classroom context, and we're drawing upon not only the expertise of teachers and teacher trainers, but also the geeks and fans among us, not just among our students, but also among ourselves as teachers and trainers who like to have a little bit of fun. So FanTALES is composed of 4 key parts. You're going to hear a little bit of each of these. What we're doing is bringing together not only the fan fiction, which you saw illustrated a little bit earlier that Frederick showed you, but also elements of interactive fiction. This reflects the kind of storytelling that you might be familiar with from the good old days in the past, those of us who are older, in that kind of choose your own adventure storytelling, but also storytelling that asks the reader to make a choice. As well as multilingualism, multilingual storytelling reflects the reality we find ourselves in. Life is not monolingual, and nor are the stories that we read. And then finally, telecollaboration, which is the 4th component, brings together the opportunity of potentially linking classrooms of learners in different contexts, different countries, to collaborate on this kind of multilingual interactive fan fiction-based storytelling. So to start off with a definition about fan fiction, this is one that I like because it's quite open and broad, from Jameson 2013, who says it's writing that continues, interrupts, reimagines, or just riffs on stories and characters other people have written about. This gets at that transformative element that Frederick mentioned earlier, where we're asking people, or what people do is take something that exists and is often loved and popular and transforms it in some way. And there are very many ways an existing story or universe within a story can be transformed. So here's an example of what we mean about transformation taking very many forms. On the right, you see kind of a fun image illustrating perhaps a quote that was elicited from fans based on a survey sent out by Clink to existing fans about how they would define fan fiction. And this is what one fan said, that fan fiction is a story written by a person in the fandom because breaking into the creator's office and telling them that everything they did is wrong and rewriting it is considered rude and illegal. So this represents one type of fan fiction that we see. It's a kind of correction or response to the text that may be critical. But a lot of fan fiction also falls under different umbrellas. That includes more celebratory or even fan fiction that could in fact be critical, but in a more indirect way where learners write or readers write themselves into the text. This is an important movement when we think about how dominant texts, especially in language learning, don't always reflect the realities of the students that we're asking to read them. So here are a few of the other genres within fan fiction that are reflected not only in fandom, but also in our fan fiction teaching materials that we are sharing with you today. I've already talked a little bit about the second one, which is referred to as fix-it-fic, where you fix something that you objected to or you thought was wrong in the initial text. Well, we also see very short-form fan fiction. Drabbles tend to be fan fiction that are 100 to 200 words. And you might see these as being actually both very challenging to write, but maybe more accessible for learners who are of lower proficiency. You often have fans who like to continue the story that they love and write continuations, or want to go back in time and explore some characters historically present in a text, but not really explored in the actual text. So they may write a prequel. Missing moments would be picking up moments where, for example, the writer fades to black and the reader might think, oh, what really happened to that character in that moment? Alternate point of view is a very fun type of fan fiction where people will rewrite, in a sense, a scene, a moment, or even an entire text from the perspective of, for example, a minor character. Or maybe we might even think from the perspective of the villain as opposed to the hero, depending on the text. We also see race bending and gender bending as a way to write characters into the text that are often unrepresented or underrepresented in the dominant literature that we ask people to read and engage with in our classes. Fusion allows fans to merge multiple things that they love, or a thing that they love with a thing that they're required to read. So, for example, merging the Sherlock Holmes characters with the Harry Potter universe. We also have alternate universe storytelling, and some of these are situated in, it may just be a time shifting to retelling a story in a different time period, or also in a familiar context. A very common trope in current fandom is rewriting a story or telling a story with beloved characters, but they're all working at the local coffee shop around the corner. So a reality that maybe many of our young people are familiar with. Another thing is remixing, which would be rewriting another fan work in a different style. So sometimes fans will like to take upon themselves the challenge of saying, oh, I want to mimic the style of a specific writer, whether it's a fan writer or a published writer, and use that in their own storytelling. And finally, we also see role play. This is another example, a non-exhaustive example. There are many more different types of fan fiction genres. But we'll sometimes see, for example, people on Twitter who will have a Twitter account that is entirely written from the perspective of, say, Moriarty in the Sherlock Holmes stories, and responds to either other fan accounts or the news from that perspective and voice of that fan or of that character. Another thing fanfiction presents that is a resource for us in our teaching materials is that fans kind of like games, and they like challenges, and they like playing. And you're going to hear a lot more about that later in our keynote talk. And one type of challenge fans may have is an organized activity where fans are challenged to perform or produce some sort of fan work, whether it's fan fiction, fan art, or even fan crafts, according to some predetermined criteria or set of prompts. Those of you who are taking part in the workshop on fan fiction later today are going to experience what this looks like. That fan fiction we'll be doing is based on a kind of challenge where you're given prompts. So we see this online where fans will like have a secret Santa fan fiction gift exchange where they're providing a story based on a request by a fan, or they'll have a challenge in the form of a fic-a-thon and other battles and charity drives that are driven by this.
This is me again. So you've heard Shannon talk about how stories can be reimagined if, for example, a fan writes him or herself into a story or changes his race or gender. And this is what exactly sometimes also happens in interactive fiction. And this is a type of story, as Shannon also introduced briefly before, similar to choose your own adventure games, where actually the reader can interact with the text. So they make choices in the text by either clicking or tapping in the text or by typing a short response in response to a question. So typically these stories are non-linear and they are told mainly through text. And what you're seeing here is a mock-up of, for example, how the Sorting Hat scene in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone would be different if, or you could imagine for yourself how the story would be different if Harry ended up in Slytherin instead of in Gryffindor House. Interactive fiction, as I already said, is an old genre. It dates back to games that some of us played in the 80s with lots of blue background scene, screen and then white text. Text adventure games. But nowadays they're seeing a strong revival because of a couple of phenomena. The first thing that you see is that the literary quality of interactive fiction has really exploded over the last decade or so. And you're seeing a lot of independent game developers, but also people like you and me find their way to easily accessible authoring tools to create interactive fiction yourself. And that is a big difference with the 80s, where you had to learn how to program in order to make such a story.
So the third component of FanTALES that we mentioned previously has to do with multilingual storytelling. This is really crucial because when we look at the language classroom, one of the things is that we see our learners bring with them a rich variety of linguistic resources. So multilingual storytelling allows them to draw upon multiple languages. This includes not only the school language, for example, if they're learning German in Germany and say a German is a second language class, or the additional language in a foreign language class, but it also allows them to draw upon the languages that may be spoken in their community or at home. And this is indeed something we see very frequently in European language classrooms, but also beyond Europe as well. And multilingual storytelling provides rich learning opportunities to support, for example, the development of plurilingual competencies, which you can see highlighted under the Common European Framework of References for Languages. It also works to weaken a monolingual habitus, this emphasis on assuming when you're working in a language that you must only exclusively draw upon one and a limited range of linguistic resources. The fourth and final component of our project is that of telecollaboration. In other circles, this may be referred to as virtual exchange, a more umbrella term that talks about the bringing together of classes in different contexts and countries to collaborate on different projects for example, not just language learning, but intercultural development. And telecollaboration is valuable in that it can allow learners the opportunity to confront other cultures, to battle stereotypes, and to create an openness towards multilingual practices. For instance, the fact if we partner classes, as you'll see later on in this presentation, between learners of a common language in different countries who may draw upon other local linguistic resources. So we propose some tasks that can be used to support this kind of international cross-classroom collaboration. For example, where you have collaborative writing among smaller teams of students in partner classes, or where you have one group of students in one class giving feedback to another group of students in another class, or where you put together perhaps a multi-class partnership and you allow for challenges and even competitions, which reflects something that we often see going on in fan spaces, because like I said earlier, fans do like a challenge and they like to compete sometimes.
So now that you're familiar with the 4 components of our project, so fan fiction, interactive fiction, multilingualism, and telecollaboration, these 4 components are what attracted a consortium of partners that compose the fellowship of the FanTALES. So 3 years ago, we started on a project funded by Erasmus Plus in the European Union, where we actually engaged in a project to develop research-based materials for doing fan fiction-based interactive storytelling, multilingual in a European context. And so this is a partnership of teacher training departments, research groups in universities with secondary schools in Belgium, Sweden, and Germany. Our target audiences and languages, we wanted from the start to include a number of languages in many ways. So we have 4 main languages in the project, but we call these plus languages. It is English plus another language, or Svenska plus another language. So we try to combine these languages to integrate the different multilingual components there. And our target audience is secondary education. We mainly worked in third grade, so 16 to 18 years onwards. But many of our materials can also be used at different levels of the curriculum. Our materials have a number of characteristics that you see here laid out on the slide. So we have designed them for communicative language teaching. It's not just about reading literature, it's not just about writing, it's really about collaborating to produce fan fiction-based interactive multilingual stories. The materials also, of course, need to be integrated into curriculum. So we provided assessment tools for that. We designed them also to be modular because we saw very many differences between the different contexts in which our materials were getting used. And we designed the materials in such a way that actually any teacher can take one component out of it, combine it with another one, and actually make that more suitable for their context. So it's very modular, call it the Lego type approach to fan fiction based storytelling. Also, our materials are customizable, and they are released under a Creative Commons license that you can use, in fact, to adapt our materials to make them suitable for your context and your learner audiences. An important thing is that we want to be mindful of the practices in the digital wilds. So we don't want, for example, to have some kind of domesticated fan fiction. If you put a lion behind a cage, he loses some of his spirit. So that's not what we wanted. And so for that reason, we also interacted with experts in fan fiction, interactive fiction beyond the project. And we designed our materials to be playful. And you'll see a little bit of that later on in the presentation. This is a little bit of the process of FanTALES. So we started out developing materials with input from learners, experts, and teachers. For example, a catalog of source text that we will dig into later, from which we could draw to develop our materials and to do fan fiction-based projects in the classroom. We developed training materials, storytelling prompts, and assessment tools. We then started experimenting with these in the classroom to fine-tune them, to get feedback. And finally, we built a couple of tools and outputs to disseminate our project, to sustain the results, and to scale them up to other audiences. And the first output or result of our project is going to be presented by Shannon.
Yes, this is the catalog of source text. We started with English And this is a resource because often teachers who want to do something like this are thinking, well, what kind of media or texts would serve as a good foundation to doing this kind of project? So the English one that we see illustrated here served as a model for those that we also did for Swedish, Dutch, and German. And for example, in English, we sent out a survey, which we got a great response to, of 351 young people who shared with us the kind of books, TV series, games, and other related media that were of interest to them and that they engage with already in English. The catalog of source text was based upon these types of surveys and includes information relevant for teachers, like summaries of the text, potentially challenging content that maybe need a special focus in the classroom, and is meant to serve as a guide for teachers looking for certain things that they can do. The second of our outputs was actually training materials in the form of learning through doing modules. These were initially designed for teacher and teacher candidates, although these can be adapted for students, and they consist of hands-on activities that provide future teachers with the experience and knowledge needed to implement either fan fiction, interactive fiction, and multilingual storytelling in the classroom. These are the foundation for the workshops that we're going to be doing later today.
Another result contains training materials not for student teachers and teachers in training, but mainly for students in secondary schools themselves. So we developed a storytelling tutorial for Twine, which is about Twine, a tool to write interactive fiction, but it's also based on, as you see, source text that we hope truly, namely Harry Potter. So it integrates fan fiction, but it also integrates some multilingual components in its design. So these are really intended for your students to do some self-based, self-guided training. It's an integrated approach, so we don't do just this is how you do X in Twine, but we integrate that with reflection about what a literary text might look like, how you learn languages, and so forth. And it really takes you from absolute beginners to, I wouldn't say I have gurus, but getting close to that. So you're starting with the basics of Twine and then end up with more advanced stuff that will be very interesting, for example, for more technically oriented students or students who study informatics as part of their curriculum. And they are designed to be very hands-on, as you see in this picture, for collaborative learning. So they come in a box that some of you here today will get back home, and the digital materials are on our website. And basically you learn in groups with a little bit of technology and also with a little bit of physical printed materials. These were designed just before COVID. We fine-tuned them during COVID, and just to say that no students were harmed during the making of this product. Okay, our next output has to do with what I consider the stuff because I'm drawn to the storytelling part. But these are what we refer to as storytelling prompts that cover these three core areas in our project. They're modules that you can combine for more complex tasks. You can see some examples here on the right in images, but they contain general task instructions or also more specific instructions for different kinds of storytelling ideas as tied to, for instance, the Sherlock Holmes stories. Instructors can combine these areas, fan fiction, interactive fiction, and multilingual storytelling, in a way that meets the needs of their students. So it's kind of like we might think of a pick and mix approach to developing materials. So in addition to the storytelling prompts, one thing that teachers really wanted and which we recognize as being very useful are assessment tools. So we've also provided a variety of what we call rubric frameworks in the 4 languages of the project that are comprised of the different components for evaluating interactive fiction, multilingual storytelling, and fan fiction. They include rubrics, and also in many of them include separate peer evaluation scales that many of our practicing teachers have found really useful and were tested with secondary school students to make sure these were effective. Our next result is a storytelling platform. So what you've heard so far is all documents, paper-based materials, and so forth. And what we've done eventually is we've integrated all of these task components, the prompts, the rubrics, the whole process of creating a task for doing fan fiction-based storytelling in your classroom in an online platform that teachers can use to design their tasks, to assign these tasks to groups of students, and also to evaluate the outcomes using the rubric frameworks that Shannon just talked about. And on the learner end of things, students will be able to log on to the platform, they will be able to write their stories there collaboratively, and then also receive feedback for students. We designed this because some of our students did go so far as posting their stories on Archive of Our Own or other online archives, but we wanted this to be a kind of sheltered environment that is very structured and integrates the different components of our project in a way that does not compromise their stories to the outside world. So if they are ready to go to Archive of Our Own, we can stimulate that, but we basically remove the barriers for creating these stories and still have an audience to write for by having this platform. And it also comprises the inventory of source texts, so that we first produced in the project. So for the 4 languages, you'll find the source texts that have been found popular in our target audience. The final output is the teacher handbook, which is obviously for teachers, and basically takes you through the whole process of FanTALES. So it answers a couple of basic questions. Why do we do FanTALES? Why would you need to do it in a classroom? What is it, and how do you actually approach it? And they use ready-made materials and templates that you can use in your classroom from one lesson to a full project, basically. So a handbook full of tips and tricks and material for you to use in your teaching. So that concludes the overview of our outputs. I'd like now to invite the teachers who are part of our project to present about how they use the materials in their teaching contexts.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you all, and it's very exciting, I have to say. Maybe I can make myself a bit more recognizable now so that you can actually see my face, but I have to put this on again because of the safety rules here at uni. Right, let's have a quick look at how we, the teachers involved in this project, actually transferred or introduced everything in our own classroom. Because it's all very exciting and we all are fans of the project to start with. But of course, now we have to transfer it to our students. And sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's a bit more difficult. And I think it's interesting for you now to see how actually we did that. And maybe, yeah, you can get some inspiration, or you can change some tasks and keep the project going. And certainly in the classroom, because that's actually why we did it. We wanted to, actually transfer our joy and our excitement to our students and make sure that they became as enthusiastic as we are about the project. So that's actually the idea. When you would think, well, maybe that's difficult, or it's a bit too technical or something. Well, no, everybody can actually do FanTALES or can work with fan fiction, interactive fiction, and multilingual stuff. You can choose actually, I can do this one lesson, or I can make it a project, depends on what maybe the possibilities are at school. Or you can do it for one language, English, for example, but you can also collaborate with a French teacher and do something together. So you have these possibilities. Or maybe or you have students with another background, and they can have, a very specific language input in the project and add some extras. So it's a lot of opportunities there. People who are not exactly tech guys and girls, don't be afraid. You can also work with cards and with stories on paper. You don't have to go to a computer class and actually develop new technologies there. That's not the idea. You can do that, of course, but you can stay low profile, so to speak, and work with cards. Of course, your students can do that individually, but also, and personally, I think it's more fun to do that in group and to collaborate. But sometimes you have these students, they want to work on their own. They want to make their baby, so to speak, their story, with the elements that they like and the fandoms that they like. But that's possible. We can all do that. I suggest that we listen to the colleagues and see what they actually realized in their classrooms. And as you can see, we have 4 secondary schools that were part of this project. The first school is in Sweden, a dance and musical school in Lund. And our dear colleague Sarah will tell you in a second what she did in the class. Then our colleagues from Kortrijk, Belgium, so that's our home base here, from Gulden Sporen College, they will present something that they did with Private Peaceful. Then our colleagues in Germany from Wörstadt, the Georg Foster Gesamtschule, they will present what they did in class when the students read The Giver. And finally, I will tell you a bit more about some, well, games and virtual reality that we introduced in our classroom in Aalst in Belgium. So I'd like to give, now the platform to Sarah, our colleague from Sweden, who will tell us a bit more what she did in Lund's Dance and Musical School. Sarah, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
That's great. Just say what I have to do, and then I click to the next slide.
Yes, next slide, please.
All right.
So I've been working with what I've called the Colors Project. I've done that 3 times now with 60 students at a time, where they work with creative writing. We look at 3 stories, they choose one of them, and then they write fan fiction on that one. So what we do is that we read and we work with and we discuss extracts from The Color Purple, The Black Cat, and The Yellow Wallpaper, hence the name The Colors Project. And then we discuss what genres are and specifically what fan fiction is. I give them basic training in text structure and specifically text structure in narratives. Then the pupils pick one of the stories that we read, and they pick one of their favorite fictional characters. We have lots of Harry Potters, we have lots of 11 from Stranger Things, we have Lorna in Orange is the New Black, and so on. And then I want them to merge their favorite character with the story of their choice. So they plan the text, they discuss their idea in groups and give each other feedback, and then they write the text using gender bending, time bending, another perspective, and all their fictional character. So here's one example of a student writing where she made Seeley in The Color Purple a trans man. And here's another sample where a student put Harry Potter in The Black Cat. And Harry Potter actually saved both the wife and the cat. And this is a project that I'm working with right now that I haven't tried yet. So my students in their last year, 18 years old, they choose their favorite novel. They're reading that right now, and they mark all examples of romantic love and sex, and they have no idea why. And then next year, we will discuss the concept of consent when it comes to love and sex. So we're going to do a big project on that. And then in groups, they will write twine stories. They choose one of the examples of love and sex. And then they write a twine story where they can explore what happens if consent is more or less clear and if it's more or less respected. So that's the next fan fiction project that I will try. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. And our colleagues from Gulden Sporen College here in Kortrijk will present what they did in the classroom. Anne and Anne.
Hello. We worked with Private Peaceful from Marburgo, as Yuri said. We worked with 2 modern language classes. That means students of 16 to 17 years old. That's the 5th form of secondary education. We worked with 45 upper secondary school learners. The end goal was to write a fan fiction story with multilingual elements and an interactive story. They worked 5 hours in class on the project, and it was individual work. So first they had to read Private Peaceful, and then they got an introduction on fan fiction and multilingualism. They were also introduced to interactive fiction. They got a basic training in Twine. And then they had to pick one of the fan fiction modules Shannon already explained. So they could choose between Fix-It Fic or a prequel sequel, missing moment, or alternate point of view.
Hello. First, we had a brainstorm because for pupils, normally they are not used to do things like that. And the first time, it's quite difficult for them. And that's the reason why we had a brainstorm before starting the individual work. Then they started writing the text, and we let the text read by their fellow pupils. They revised and they said that doesn't fit, or I should change that a little bit, but they couldn't change the content. In fact, they couldn't say I would do that in another way. So it was just checking they did. And then they had to implement their story in Twine. Here you can see the work in progress. I'll give an example. On the right side, you can see Charlie and his brother leave for the war, and they go to the station. And here you had to make the choice. Is Charlie's girlfriend, Molly, going with them, or is she staying at home? And the story you get depends on the choice you make. So if you press Molly is with them at the station, you get another story than when you press Molly stays at home. Yes, so that's just a small part, of course, of the complete story. And then, after finishing their story, they can read each other's stories. That was quite fun. You can see that the pupils were enjoying reading the story. And, of course, the last part was for the teacher. We had the evaluation part of the written text and, of course, also the interactive story. Yes, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, let's move to Germany, where Stephanie has tried out a few activities in her classroom, and she will tell us a bit more about the Giver project.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
So, as you just said, I did something on the Giver with my year 10, and we had the creative approach in the last chapter. So, for those who don't know the novel, it has an open but rather negative ending. So I asked the students to write an alternative ending, so kind of a fix-it fic, and they were able to write something on their own or do it in teamwork. And I told them to either use Twine, so we had done something on Twine before, or they could just write a coherent text. And we actually published some examples in Archive of Our Own, as you can see in a few moments. They got a preparatory homework so that they could think about how to build up the text, how to build up the Twine work. And then we had 2 lessons in which we did the work. So, and here you can see 2 examples. So on the left side, you see an example of a Twine work, actually a quite long text, and then in the end 3 choices. And as my colleagues just explained, so whatever statement you click on, it leads you to a different story. And on the right side, I published with my students' permission, I published their text. They fused the Giver with Vampire Diaries, so that was really exciting. And since I did not want them to give avoid too much personal information, I actually created my own account. So that's why it says GFG May. But then I gave them credit later. So that was from a time before we had the storytelling platform. Yeah, that's it. Thanks, Sue.
Right, okay, let's move to Belgium then. My school is Sint-Joseph College in Aalst. And, well, we fused a bit, so to speak, and we tried to combine as many elements as possible. Why? Because I had a very, a very diverse audience in my classroom, so to speak. So a lot of people had different backgrounds and they had different interests. And yeah, my first idea was when you want to introduce fan fiction, your students should be fan of something. You can't actually, well, force them to be a fan of this or that text. So that's the reason why we fused a lot. And as you can see, my class was 20 upper secondary school learners. And we wanted, yes, to, well, write an interactive fan fiction story containing, if possible, multilingual elements. That was not always easy, but we tried. And group work, as I said earlier, is actually more fun than individual work. The first thing that I did, I let the class pick a kind of universe, and they chose Assassin's Creed. That's a game, well, franchise, and that contains different games. That was, well, that's actually interesting, because when they would pick one game, you automatically have a specific setting, a specific time. So, for instance, as you can see there, they chose Origins, and that there the setting is Ptolemaic Egypt. Odyssey is another game that's classic Greece as a setting. Black Flag is pirates. Unity is set during the French Revolution. And finally, the game Syndicate is set in Victorian London. So all these games are actually, well, part of the Assassin's Creed franchise. But that, well, could actually, or that the idea was of this project to, well, incorporate all these, or to use all these stories that they wrote, for instance, in Ptolemaic Egypt or in classic Greece, and to make one general story, main story, in which we would time travel to each story that they wrote. We never realized it, but that was the original plan. So when you would make this a year project, that would be ideal. You have one main story and a lot of time traveling, and each time that your main character time travels, you will have story A based in, well, or based on the Origins game, or a Black Flag, and then you have a lot of pirates, for instance. So that was the initial idea. What did we realize in these 25 hours? We wrote, well, introduction scenes for all the time travel stories, but we never came to the general story. So that's maybe something that we will work out next year with another class. The interesting part was that they could add characters from their own fandom. So we got a lot of vampires and pirates and Marvel heroes during the French Revolution, which is quite exciting, actually. This is one of the results, as you can see. So also we realized all these stories in Twine. We wrote them in Twine. And they liked that they could actually, well, make choices. And another project that we did was, as I told you, virtual reality, trying to introduce virtual reality in the classroom. That was not easy. Why? Because of the budget. So it's quite expensive to work with virtual reality. So we used a Google Cardboard of €7. As you can see, the girl is actually, well, holding that. The students created a scene, or they acted, sorry, a scene. And that was actually photographed. You have these 360 degrees photographs that you can take with an app and with your mobile phone. And then the reader of the story can choose when reading, oh, I can actually go to that specific scene. And I actually put on the goggles and I look for clues. So that's a choice that the reader can make. And when he or she finds the clue, well, of course, then it's maybe a difference for the rest of the story. As you can see here, for instance, that's a 360-degree picture. So you have a lot of students doing weird stuff there. For instance, when in the story you have that the murder or the crime was committed without witnesses, when you look through the goggles, you see actually that there is a girl at the door. So that changes the story. This is fun, and this also contributes to the interactive part, actually, of the project. We had to stop this because of Corona, but well, there are worse ways to stop a lesson than working with virtual reality. Some remarks to actually conclude is that when you work in a classroom with fan fiction or with creative writing exercises, your students should have some prior knowledge about what fan fiction is, how you work with twine. You can't just enter the classroom and say, well, let's give it a go and start writing. Also, dictionaries and other supporting material can be interesting. They are working online, so that's easy to use, but they should actually know how. And then, of course, will you actually, preset the teams, yes or no, as a teacher? Maybe in some classrooms that's possible, in others it isn't. And then finally, I skipped the rules on using pictures because that depends from school to school and country to country. But they should learn how to quote, of course. That's one of the academic skills. But we end with student creativity versus language accuracy. So when you work with a lot of fan fiction and you let your students create text, don't be the fussy teacher who actually focuses too much maybe on grammar, language and stuff, because that's a creativity killer from time to time. So when you can of course support, but let creativity rule, so to speak. And that's a good phrase to end this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yuri and colleagues. I think that gives a broad overview of the different projects that we implemented that you could also do in your particular context. We're a little bit behind schedule, but would like to do a very quick demo of the technology that we also developed in the project, and also incorporate some of the lessons learned in the projects to make it more convenient and also easily share the stories across the teams. So we'll do a demo of, and there it is, of our storytelling kit. So Juliette is now a student in my class, and she opens our storytelling kit, which is basically a physical box with cards in it. So this is the fan fiction unplugged way of going about. And for this task that we're going to start, we are going to work with alternate universe as a genre, and so Juliette can scan the code on the QR code, the QR code on the card, and then find some more information on alternate universe and potentially some stories that other students have also written as examples of alternate universe fan fiction. That's demonstrate how you could introduce the activity in class. So each group could have the same prompt or a different prompt. The idea is here that you work in student groups, and each student group has one of these storytelling kits with which they can start their writing. We'll move on to the next part of the technology demo, which I think involves me and Juliette to go to the platform that we developed. Room here. And Viviane, if you could also add the teacher content and student content to the screen, then everyone at a distance can see what is actually happening over there. Yeah, okay, there we are. So on the right-hand corner of what you're seeing on your screen is that's Juliette, and she's logged onto the platform using an account, and she's now doing an alternate universe fan fiction in Little Red Riding Hood as a source text. So Little Red Riding Hood here is alternate universe fan fiction, and for example, it could involve Little Red Riding Hood set in the 21st century, where she is driving a Tesla in New York, and her car says something to her, and so forth. So instead of being set in the woods in the Middle Ages or somewhere in the Middle Ages with the Brothers Grimm, we have this in the 21st century alternate universe storytelling with Little Red Riding Hood. So on the left-hand side of the screen, of Juliette's screen, you saw her working in a writing environment. On the right-hand side, you see all the task instructions and all the different prompts that she needs to incorporate in the story. And when she's done writing, she can submit her work to the teacher. And she does that for the entire group. So she's here working collaboratively with a couple of students, but she's just submitted the solution for the entire group. And then from the teacher end side of things, which is the left-hand corner of your screen, you'll see the teacher logging onto the platform. You see that little Red Riding Hood alternate universe has been assigned with a due date of 30 November. And one of the groups there that involves Juliette has entered their story. And I can now read that story, and I can evaluate the story with the different fanfiction rubric items that we have developed in the project. So I'm not going to do that now, but it includes here a couple of fanfiction rubric items, and also some one rubric item related to vocabulary. I think this is a great story, Juliette. Fantastic. Nothing to improve, really. So I can submit my feedback to Juliette and her group, and then on her end of the things, she will receive the evaluation by clicking on that card, and she will receive the feedback here. So this is teacher evaluation. We haven't implemented peer evaluation in the platform because of lack of time and resources, but here this is what a typical writing exercise on our FanTALES platform could look like. We also have a second set of prompts, which I will do very briefly and show what happens there. So we have a second task here on the platform. If you follow the teacher and the left-hand corner of the screen, where we are doing fusion. We're fusing the matrix with your favorite story. And here this task has not been started yet, so I can do that as a teacher. I choose my class, which is now the FanTALES closing event, which you're all part of. And you receive accounts that you can use to log into the platform and check it out for yourself, how it works. In the second step there, I can compose my groups. So basically, I see my students on the right-hand side. I click Compose Groups, and then the groups are formed automatically, randomly, really, but I can also do that manually if I want to, because sometimes you know in which group students will work better than in other groups. You also assign some story elements here. If you have multiple story elements, like an interactive choice or a particular kind of object in your story, which is what happens with Challenge Fic, you can distribute these different object types randomly to the group. So that one group has another group, object to include in their story than another one. Or you can let them choose, but I won't demonstrate that here. I just set a due date, again, by the end of November. So if you have time between now and end of November, you can enter this writing competition. So it's now been assigned. And Juliette, in the right-hand corner of the screen, can see this task. It is a task in Twine, so it's not a linear story. It's an interactive fiction story, and she gets basically a beginning of a story, but a certain structure that we use as a model, but also to guide them a little bit, but otherwise they get lost very easily. That's one of the things that we saw here. And we're in the matrix, the blue pill, red pill scene, where, for example, the task could be to insert Harry Potter as the main character here in the scene, and he makes the decision between the red pill and the blue pill. And so Juliette can work in this environment just like the other environments with nonlinear or linear storytelling, and she can submit her work in the same way as for the other ones. So that concludes our technology demo. Our materials are now online, so everything is there for you to be had for free, downloadable. You can print the materials. We will also add some guides if you want to make your own storytelling kits, because some of you will be abroad, not in Belgium, and we won't be shipping these across the Atlantic. But there will be guides to make your own storytelling kits with cheap boxes that you can buy online and assemble these. And so have a go on our website. You can find all the links and materials, and will be available via info@fantales.eu to help you with questions regarding the implementation. That concludes our first part of the program today. Our keynote is about to start in a little bit. I think 5 minutes is what we agreed. But we can take a couple of questions if there are any burning questions at this point to take. So either on the outputs or the classroom implementations. I saw some questions.
James had a good question. James, I don't know if you can share that more broadly.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah, you can. Okay. Yeah, I was just interested in about the usage of Twine. What was the rationale for using Twine? It seems to be like a huge part of it. And was that based on the... I'm not a follower of it, so I don't know quite well. But so, yeah, what was the rationale for using Twine, essentially?
The basic rationale for Twine is that we wanted to do a project on fan fiction. And when we started to think about fan fiction, how you can reimagine how a story can go differently. And for instance, insert yourself as a character in a story that then has to make a choice. Am I going to be this or that character? That actually brings it very close to interactive fiction, where you as a reader actually make these choices for the characters. So actually reimagining stories, doing fan fiction based writing and combining that with interactive fiction made sense to us. That does not answer your question, I think, regarding the classroom implementation. I believe in the chat I saw you remark that maybe some students may have been pushed to use Twine, or whether that influenced their work in any way. So I maybe can defer to Yuri to answer that question for you, James. But it's a great question. Thank you.
Yeah, it's true that the students actually didn't have the choice to choose Twine. That's something that we developed or that we chose in the project, and I came in the classroom and just gave it a go. But to be honest, all my students liked it very much. And for those who have already worked with Twine, it's not that difficult. It's not that you have to be an expert in HTML editing or something. So you have a few basic, codes or things that you have to fill in, and then you can already develop choices. So the only thing that we did in class was we wrote the story in Twine, and you had the option A or option B, and you had to work with these double square brackets, and there it was. So it was very easy. I think when the program was a bit more difficult, then a lot of students would actually say, well, oh, this is not our piece of cake. But it's pretty easy to use in a classroom. So I'm a fan definitely of Twine, but it was totally new for me as well as a teacher, and I learned it through FanTALES, and I introduced it in the classroom, but there was no reaction on, sir, what are you going to do here? And we want a language lesson and not a computer lesson. That was not actually the reaction. If that can, answer your question a bit.
I got so many follow-up questions, but I'll leave it for other people. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't see any more questions in the chat. Anyone else has a burning question? Not at the moment.
I do have a question. Do we still have time?
Yes.
Hello.
We have time for one.
Okay. Thank you. So I have a question for the teacher, because we want students to connect students with the fandom that they have passion for, right? And I wonder if the teacher themselves will get familiar with that fandom or the source material. Does that happen?
Yeah, that happened indeed. So they come up with fandoms that I have never heard before. So it's also exciting for me. I see that as a kind of, making my world brighter and richer. And I'm always, eager to learn from my students as well. It's not just one direction, me presenting stuff. So it's also the other way around. So that was indeed, a rich experience. On the other hand, I think that it's also important that to start up the activity, that you have to, introduce something that is, your fandom, or that you have to, start up the activity by, for instance, you work with fairy tales, And then you say, well, let's pick a fairy tale from Grimm, not Disney or not other. So we start with something more classic maybe, or something schoolish, so to speak. And then we develop, and then you can add your elements. Please do so. But it should be actually, well, a combination of the two worlds indeed. And I think when that is in balance, you have a great task. But I'm always, well, excited about what my students choose. And sometimes they choose very classic stuff that I say, well, okay, right, this is a classic author. Well, great. It's not that it's always FIFA 21 or something that's their fandom and nothing else matters. So that's how it works. But I think when the balance is there, it's a great task.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.